Hello, I'm Maria Hall-Brown, and this is Protest and Promise, an opportunity for young Angelenos to have their questions answered and for people in the leadership of Los Angeles to hear what our young Angelenos are concerned about. I'm delighted to be joined today by two wonderful officers from the LAPD, their public information officers, Officer Rosario Cervantes and Sergeant Hector Guzman. So nice to have you here.
Thank you, a pleasure.
And the whole reason you're here is because of our wonderful panel. I'm delighted that we have joining us today Isaac Michael. Hi, Isaac Michael. Great to see you.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Hello.
Elena, good to see you. Brianna, so nice to see you again. And Evan, one of the busiest people I know. Great to see you. Now, I'll just give you a little background. All of these wonderful youth are students. They all have an incredibly interesting perspective on things. And I'm really excited because Isaac this is his first opportunity to join us in Protest and Promise. And he has a lot of things that he is very passionate about because he's the president of the American Indian Student Association at California State University, Northridge. So we're delighted to have you part of our panel today. And everybody else, welcome back. It's great to see your fabulous faces. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and do the basics. What is the role of a public information officer, in particular with the LAPD?
So basically our role is to inform the public of what's going on in the community. So we have various steps where, our information gets vetted. We'll provide certain information that is releasable as long as it's not impeding our investigation. We'll provide that information to the media, and then the media outlets will go ahead and provide that information to the community. And our goal is for everyone to be safe.
Okay, so are those decisions about what is releasable based on the public's need to know, or is it based on the ability of the LAPD to demonstrate transparency? What are the parameters in the release of information?
Yeah, I mean, we always try to balance, like you said, the public's need to know, right to know, want to know, versus, interfering with an ongoing investigation, and more importantly, victims' rights. With a lot of crimes, there's confidentiality laws that don't allow us to disclose certain things about an investigation. So we understand if a member of the community looks out their window and sees 10 police cars down the street, they want to know what's going on. So we try to balance letting them know what's going on, if there's a public safety component, if there's something they need to be worried about, versus the rights of the people that are a victim. Or even then, if somebody is arrested, right, they haven't had the opportunity to have due process. So we have to allow that due process to make its way through the court system. They have to be arraigned, charges have to be presented to either the city attorney or the district attorney's office. We have to wait to see how that plays out in court. So before we just start talking, on a whim about what happened somewhere, there's a lot of things there's a lot of checks and balances that need to take place.
And the basic information that we can release right away will be like the date, time, location, exactly just a little synopsis of what happened. If once the suspect has been officially booked, then we can give out the name of the suspect. And obviously we have victim confidentiality. That's one thing that we will not release, victims' information.
Well, as much as you share the news, I know the LAPD has been in the news, and I know Evan had a question about how the LAPD is these days in general.
Yes, I was wondering what measures the LAPD is taking to eliminate bias from policing.
Sure. So as you can imagine, we all have bias, right? We're human, right? So whether it's things that you were exposed to as a child, or things that you were exposed to as a teenager or as an adult, I think the department and the city understands that we hire from the human population. So there's biases. We actually go through a training called implicit bias training, where you're taught that you do have biases. Now the problem lies in when you allow some of those biases to then turn into prejudice against people, against a protected class, and then you allow those prejudices to then impact your job, which is to protect Angelenos, to protect and to serve. when you start allowing those, those biases and those prejudices to then interfere and influence your decisions on the job, that's when we have a problem, right? So the department has zero tolerance for any type of, prejudice or any type of, whether it's, sexist, racist, homophobic, any type of, discriminatory behavior. There's zero tolerance. And when we learn of any officers that are engaged in any type of discriminatory behavior, there's severe action and consequences.
When you're talking about anybody in any kind of point of view, background, culture, everything, you're talking about a wide range. And I know that Isaac Michael has obviously a passion about a wonderful culture that he's a participant in. So, I know that you had questions about how the LAPD works with all types of people.
How does LAPD and the Mayor's Office of City Homeless Initiative interact and cooperate with LA City, LA County Native American Indian Commission? Is there any cooperation at all, or is LAPD even informed on the Native American Indian Commission's subcommittee of homelessness?
So we actually have a vast array of entities within the department that work with all types of, cultural groups throughout the community. So we have a community relations section out of the chief's office that has a variety of liaisons, officers that are assigned to, various communities throughout the neighborhood, throughout the city. I actually used to work for a division called Community Relationship Division. But there's a great effort that's placed within the department of reaching out to all Angelenos, whether it's, somebody from a certain culture, certain religion, certain background. Now, how we're involved with each specific committee or subcommittee within the mayor's office, I'm not exactly sure. I don't want to provide misinformation, but we do work hand in hand with the mayor's office, to make sure that we're reaching as many Angelenos as we can, day in and day out.
It's a very complicated issue, and I know that was one of the things Elena was curious about.
Yes, I was curious, and I wanted to ask, what's the most important thing you take into consideration when you decide what to share and what not to share with the public?
Well, for the most part, we'll share everything that we can as long as it doesn't impede an investigation or it's not going to harm the investigation. So, for example, if we put out all the information out, it might, make the suspect that's watching TV might want to flee the state, might want to do other things that we don't want him to do. So we'll refrain from releasing certain information. Sometimes we do have a lot of surveillance video that detectives are looking at. They have a lot of witnesses. They canvass the area for any information, and they're actively working on the case. And once they're actively working on the case, once they have exhausted all their means, they'll reach out to us, media relations, so we can put out the information to have help from the public, which is very important from the community. We can't solve all the cases all the time on our own, and we need you guys, to be our eyes and ears.
And then myself, as a member of the public communications group, one of the things that we have to keep in mind is, in this day and age of social media, we understand that information and news is getting out there at a much faster pace than we've ever seen before. So whereas before the department would be a little bit more reactive in terms of providing information to the public, nowadays we have to be cognizant that if we don't say something, social media will say something for us, right? So it's incumbent upon us to try to get as much information as we can, keeping victims' rights in mind, keeping the integrity of the case in mind, but get as much information as we can out there as fast as we can, because as they know probably better than we do, social media is a very powerful and very fast, very active platform. So we have to kind of try to keep up with the times.
Good question. How many of you go to social media sources for your news immediately versus, okay, yeah, exactly, versus the traditional form of going on the news, watching broadcast news, et cetera? Do you all go to social media to find things out right away? Brianna, where do you get your immediate news?
I usually just get notified on my phone, honestly. There'll be some kind of story and it'll just pop up, and that's how I mostly get my news.
And it doesn't matter the source, that you have alerts just coming up for a number of different things?
Yeah, so I know like I have a citizen app and that's pretty well where they notify you of crimes around the place. I know I also was wondering like with apps like that where people can kind of report their own incidents or stuff like that, how do you guys work around apps like that or with apps like that?
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
that's good that you asked that question because we have Citizen App or the people that work for Citizen App that will call the office and they'll call for a specific incident that is occurring and we'll give them that information. So before they put it out to the citizens, they'll confirm that information with us and we'll give them all the information that we have at the moment. And then that way they can get it to you guys quicker.
So back to social, because I know that's one of the things that you're very focused on, Sergeant, is, social media.
Right.
How fast and how much has that changed within the department to get the information out immediately? Because I know if there's anything happening, I'm going to immediately look on a Twitter feed of some kind because
Right.
that's the most direct, fastest. And I may not pay attention. I'll look at what everybody's saying and then kind of look at the official thing. So how has your job changed and how has your job been more complicated by the fact that we are all PIOs these days?
That's a great point. So we say that anybody with a cell phone is pretty much a reporter nowadays, right? So we work hand in hand with all of our command staff, with officers at each division to empower them to use social media at their local neighborhood, whether they're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Nextdoor. We want to let them know that it's a tool that they can use. It's not the only tool to use, but it's a tool that they can use to reach a much broader audience across various demographics. But knowing that as well, we also understand that there's pitfalls to social media, just like anything else. There's a lot of misinformation or inaccurate information out there. So we have to, stay on top of social media because if you're not talking about it in the first 5 or 10 minutes, somebody else is. And as you can imagine, we're a very, very large department. So a lot of times to get that information from whatever source we have to get it from, and then get it vetted, make sure it's accurate, submit it for review, and then post it, you might be talking 30 minutes to 45 minutes. So you're always battling the clock. But it's a balance because the last thing we don't want to do is put out misinformation out there ourselves. So in a rush to get information out there, we don't want to be inaccurate because then, as you can imagine, the LAPD putting out inaccurate information is going to cause even more confusion.
How often do you have to fight inaccurate information? Is that standard these days or is it a rare occurrence?
Well, that's always something that it's happening as far as once an incident occurs, we get calls right away, let's say from the media. They want to know what's happening. But at the moment, officers are still responding to that call. So according to the person reporting, they'll report whatever they're seeing at the moment. And when officers get there, sometimes that's not the case. And it's a completely different type of call. So we try to put out the information as quickly as we can. But once we do that, sometimes, we remind people that, this is preliminary information, that it's constantly changing until the officers do, their full investigation. And so it's important to conduct your investigation thoroughly so you can handle the situation accordingly.
All right, you both have to forgive me because I'm going to open up a question that I'm going to request that the panel be very respectful, but I'm going to ask it anyways. And I'm going to go around and I'm going to ask your honest opinion in terms of, how you're feeling about the LAPD right now, and do you trust it in terms of its ability to share with you information clearly and accurately. So Evan, do you feel as if the LAPD is being open and honest, and do you feel like they're sharing with you what you need to know when you need to know it about what's happening in your community?
I think with all sources of information, I'm always concerned about priorities. So, there are going to be some cases that you prioritize over others. Who do those affect, and who do the ones that you place on the back burner affect? Am I hearing the information that's most relevant to me, or am I hearing the information that's most relevant to another population? And then what is slipping through the cracks?
Okay, Isaac Michael.
Information that gets put on the back burner sometimes can be a priority to other groups or other community members, and it can hurt the community at large. I think about I think about raids at homeless encampments. I heard more about that from people who were just civilians or active on social media.
Elena, how do you feel about the information that is being provided to you from the LAPD, from public information?
I would say that I feel rather conflicted about as to answering that question because on one hand, as the officers have said, it is a kind of balancing game between what you're able to tell, what is safe to tell, and what you actually do choose to tell. And you also have to balance that with what the public wants to know. But on the other hand, I do agree with some of the other people who have already spoken as that some issues which might affect some people more than others don't get the attention that they deserve.
Got it. Okay, Brianna, you're last.
Yeah, so I'm kind of with Elena. Like, it's kind of I understand everything you guys are saying, but I feel like sometimes you're kind of left with more questions than answers, and a lot of times you kind of have to withhold a lot of information, and so it kind of leaves the public a little bit confused, and that's what I feel.
Okay, so I think there are two things at stake here, and that's what I'm hearing from the youth, is that it's the amount of information is provided and also the subject matter that is chosen to be shared. You know, as Michael Isaac said, sometimes major events happen and you don't hear anything, or it doesn't seem to be bubble to the surface to be important unless some drama happens in a later date. So how is that handled, and how do you assure these young people in Los Angeles who have a stake in it that what they need to know is being appropriately shared?
So as you can imagine, in a city of 4 million people and with so many dozens and dozens of different neighborhoods, the way Evan was saying is, I want to hear what's important or relevant to me, right? Which is why we've empowered all of our 21 geographic areas to have their own social media presence. That way they can speak to what's going on in their own specific neighborhoods. I tell people all the time, unfortunately, when something happens, everybody looks to the police department to see what you're saying or how you're solving it. Unfortunately, a lot of times, it's not something that we should be talking about it because it's not fair to the overall city family. So if it's not a police-related matter, you probably won't hear the police department talking about it.
Rosario, and have your jobs changed? Because this whole opportunity to share these viewpoints, stemmed from civil unrest. I mean, that's the whole reason this show exists in the first place. Has your ability to do more, has your point of view, has your training, have things changed within the LAPD in these last 2+ years?
Well, as far as for media relations, it has. We're a lot busier. We handle a lot of requests, like, international. They want to know what the LAPD is doing regarding certain, situations. So we get a lot of requests from citizens wanting to know, what's going on within the department. What are we doing? So it's become a lot busier, kind of like we're wearing lots of hats, And all those questions, like Sergeant Guzman said, are coming to us. But in some of those questions need to be vetted out to other departments in the city of LA that, that can assist as well. But it has changed. I do feel it like more. There's more with less.
Okay.
And I would say, at least the biggest thing from my perspective is it's made the department, just like it's made everybody, kind of take a moment to reflect and ask yourself, what happened? Where's the disconnect? How did we, get to this point? And then what are we going to do now moving forward, right? I have family and friends that live, in the city of LA, and I'm always talking to them, and I always tell them, don't answer me, the way you're going to answer me. Forget that I'm your brother who's a cop or your cousin who's a cop. Like, we want to hear, your honest answers. I think, moving forward, these honest and heartfelt and sometimes, believe it or not, very uncomfortable conversations, they need to take place. This is the only way we're going to learn from each other and move forward. So it's unfortunate and tragic, a lot of the things that have happened in the past couple of years, but it gave all of us, the opportunity to reflect and see what needs to happen. And, Chief Moore has been, very, very strong about talking about reimagining policing and, working with all the partnerships throughout the city to make sure that as a city, we do move forward from what happened.
All right, well, on that note, here you have 4 people who can provide you information as public information officers to take back and share. So, Elena, if you wanted the LAPD to know what they should be doing differently, what they should be more sensitive to, what they should be more aware of, what you feel that they may have neglected, or even what you're appreciative of that has changed in the last 2 years, to take back, to hear.
Well, most of the research and experience that I have with studying policing has been with the Young Center's California Youth Think Tank a few years ago. And our topic was accountability in the police force. And with that research, what we've discovered, and Evan was part of this research as well, I believe, was that police officers often don't get a lot of accountability in the police department, whether through the justice system or through the consequences to their job. So I guess a question I would want to ask is, what's one way that the LAPD holds themselves accountable?
Sure. So there's a variety of ways. So there's an inspector general that's an independent body that oversees the department along with police commission, which is a 5-member civilian oversight body. They're all appointed by the mayor's office. And then within the LAPD, there's a professional standards bureau, which within that bureau, there's internal affairs groups. So everybody's heard of like internal affairs or
Sure.
IA. The department understands that we're human and we'll make mistakes. There's certain things that are not tolerated, like I spoke about earlier, any type of discriminatory behavior, any type of criminal conduct, of course, is not. But when officers do make mistakes, there's a process, an investigative process, an adjudication process, where we allow officers the opportunity to learn from their mistakes, train them, and the hope is that they don't commit that same mistake again. Because if they do, they understand it's called progressive discipline, and the consequences will be, much more severe later on.
So, Evan, in your point of view, what needs to be addressed, in particular with the LAPD and their opportunity to share information, or what does the LAPD need to hear from young Angelino as yourself?
I would say that when we're discussing issues like bias and prejudice, I would like it if we could talk about it on the system level and not just the individual, because we're discovering that a lot of these issues, they exist in our society and they exist in our systems and they exist across the board, but they can be amplified in policing. And not just talking about the 0 tolerance rule and how, the punishment that an individual receives, but how do we reform on a system level, and that's how we can actually solve these issues, because, we'll just see them reoccurring if we just go after the individual. I also had a question. I think you brought up something really important when you mentioned the role of the LAPD and what is in the LAPD's purview, what should the LAPD be reacting to. And I was wondering what the system is in place for when you get a call and it's not a policing matter, because we have so many instances where people will call the police. It's not something that the police should really be there for. It may be a mental health issue, physical health issue, and we do know that those affect communities of color on an unequal level. So what is your system in place for referring to other organizations?
Well, once we're there, we'll assess, the situation. And of course, once we're there, we're going to still assist. We'll just get our resources. Like you mentioned, if it's a mental health issue, then we have our unit, that mental evaluation unit, that we can call them out to assist us and see if that's something that they can help us out with. If they're already in the system, is this like a person that's has been in the system that has a mental health condition, then they will help us, and then they will take that person to get them the proper help that they need. So we won't leave, we'll stay there with them and help them as much as we can.
Isaac, I saw you sort of nodding your head when, Michael, excuse me, when Evan was talking about, maybe non-specific police matters that then become an issue. But let's go back to the idea of what would you want the LAPD to know from your perspective that could trickle back, perhaps, if you wanted to share your point of view.
I was nodding my head in response to, basically I had questions on which organizations or social justice organizations facilitates LAPD's trainings, or how do you cooperate with people who actually do the work in, mental hospitals, or work with people who are autistic, or how do you work with them? What and who do you work with?
Right. So I think the question for both of them has been, what are organizations and what procedures are in place now to more appropriately handle things that maybe you were called out to first, but other organizations, other groups, other entities of support would be the more appropriate
Sure.
help
So
there.
our communications division are operators who receive these calls day in and day out, whether it's the non-emergency line or the 911 line. They're going through constant ongoing training as to when they get these calls, they have to decide, and they have supervision there that helps them decide, is this a police-related matter? Is this something that a police officer should be responding to? Or is this call better, being diverted to another entity? So whether it's, through the city's 311 department, where they have access to a variety of resources, whether there's a pilot program with D.D. Hirsch, where they will refer calls that involve somebody experiencing some form of mental illness, where if there's not an immediate need for a police officer to respond, that call is then referred over to a clinician with D.D. Hirsch, who then will take that call and will deal with that person and give them the best resources that they can. Because quite honestly, they have a lot more training in how to deal with mental illness than police officers do. We go through training, mental health intervention training. It's a 40-hour training, but these are people that are trained. That is their job day in and day out. So instead of us taking that call and sending an officer out to the scene and then determining, well, we should probably have somebody from D.D. Hirsch out here, instead, those operators have the training to be able to divert that call at that moment, put them in direct contact immediately with a trained clinician that can help them deal with whatever mental illness they're dealing with.
So I understand more that there are more partnerships between the LAPD and different organizations now, that those partnerships for support are kind of expanding.
Yeah, there's a vast array, whether it's dealing with the homeless crisis or dealing with mental illness, dealing with just day in day out family issues.
Like, for example, domestic violence as well. That's something that we have resources for that.
All right, so there's been progress in those regards. All right, so Brianna, I got to leave you. We're running out of time, which is terrible. But Brianna, what would you send back to the LAPD if you could?
Well, I really just was curious. I know in this day and age, especially, the LAPD has such a negative light. Like, so many people view it in such a negative light. And so how do you guys feel about that, and how, although you guys are meant to protect and serve, most of the public doesn't view you guys like that?
Morale.
Yeah, I mean, we're human. It as you can imagine, it affects us. I was born and raised in South LA. My mom still lives in the city. I clearly understand that there's a lot of misconceptions or negative perceptions of law enforcement. What I try to do is just one interaction at a time, one day at a time, try to show the people of LA that we're human just like you. We're part of the community just like you. At the end of the day, of course, morale is an important topic, and we try to stay on top of it and see how it's affecting the officers. But we're also trying to understand why are there those negative perceptions, and what can we do to not necessarily just change them. Of course, you want people to understand what's happening, understand why are they valid, and what can we do to to correct those mistakes.
Great. All right. Well, I cannot thank you both enough. So thank you for taking the time. And my wonderful panel of brilliant young Angelinos. It's been terrific. Isaac Michael, wonderful to have you here. Elena, always great to see you. Brianna, thank you so much. And Evan, you take care. And officers, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank
Nice
you.
to meet you
Take it
guys.
easy.
And that's a wrap on this Protest and Promise.